Hi, good morning, Dr. Hart. I am doing my What is Difference presentation this morning. I did bring my coffee with me too. But over the last 2 weeks of class, we've discussed whether we think that media narratives influence society. And this week specifically, we discussed media narratives that surround gender. I think that media portrayals of gender can reinforce gender schemas within society. And today I'm going to talk about what gender is, where difference comes from, and then discuss the media narratives that can create difference between gender. So I'm going to start with what is gender. Well, according to an article by Oster and Ohm, the BIM sex role inventory, which measures how feminine, masculine, or androgynous someone is very dynamic, and a person's answers can differ depending on the context that they're taking it in. So based on this study, gender identity is influenced by our behaviors and characteristics, not just our sex. And this could be altered depending on who we're with or what we're doing in the moment, such as if we were with, a parent, we might categorize ourselves as loving children and being more nurturing, versus if we were in a work setting where we could consider ourselves to be more assertive and being leaders. But so despite what biological sex a person is, they can behave in a way that the BIM sex role inventory would categorize as the opposite gender of their sex. Just to give another example of this, both my husband and myself took the BIM sex role inventory, and I was categorized as being more masculine, having more masculine characteristics, and then he was categorized as having more feminine characteristics. So we did end up having some differences there from our biological sexes. So where does difference come from? Typical stereotypes place men as the ideal that others are judged against. And just to give an example of this, research that Aki Uchida did, just looking into historical differences of genders, revealed that women's communication styles were considered different than the norm. Which is being based off of men's communication styles. So women's speech is being labeled as less than men's, which whether that's true or not, this does create a stereotype that women are inferior to men. In the article, Theorizing Feminist History by Sue Morgan, she goes into detail that in the 1970s, patriarchy was feminism's first attempt at theorizing difference. So as a feminist concept, patriarchy is just a bias against women. The concept was highly controversial because people thought it was very blunt and wasn't going to do justice to gender relations. But then in the 1980s, Judith Bennett was able to further contextualize patriarchal studies, which did offset some of the criticism because she presented women not only as victims of patriarchy, but also as colluders and survivors. Then hegemonic masculinity, which James Lowell defines as the power that one social group holds over another, was also a concept developed in the 1970s. It was also controversial. Many were just thinking that society was trying to say that men were too macho. People saw both of these concepts, hegemonic masculinity and patriarchal theories, as only encompassing the white person's point of view. They didn't think that they told the story of people of color. This despite feminist history being primarily international from the beginning. Critics of these concepts feel that race bias can occur when power is being conceptualized solely as a gender issue and doesn't include cultural differences. Gay liberation and the concept of homophobia also came about in the 1970s. Theorists saw gay liberation as an assault on gender stereotypes and an idea of a hierarchy within masculinity grew out of prejudice from straight men against gay men. Despite the creation of different concepts of gender, I do want to state that while femininity and masculinity are considered separate entities, according to research, feminism is not limited to any one gender. The main intention is to just overcome general discrimination and injustice in the world. But with these separate concepts of gender identities, we can see a hierarchy created not only within each gender, so within masculinity, within femininity, but this also encompasses race as well, and then between the gender identities. So this social power hierarchy does seem to place straight white men at the top of it. So this, already creates stereotypes, as some people being more oppressive groups than others. So just to go into some media narratives that do create difference, according to some research by Rebecca Collins, women are underrepresented in media. In the 1970s, the male to female ratio portrayed on television was 2.5 to 1. Now, this was, representative of the times, because that's how many men to women were working at the time. So there were 2.5 men to every 1 woman who were working. Still, this doesn't represent, women's roles at the time, which was different. They were staying home maybe, but they just weren't working. I think that they could have still been represented equally. Now, to the 2000s, there have been 1.66 men portrayed for every 1 woman on television, but that's not even of our times with 1.2 men working for every 1 woman working. So it might not seem like that big of a difference, but obviously women are not being portrayed equally on television. And with a wider variety, of television programming than we had 3 decades ago, you would think that we would be better represented. Women are also typically portrayed as objects, and sexual objects specifically, such as their bodies might take the place of a bottle in a commercial. So, the real question here is whether or not any of this can influence a viewer's attitudes towards genders. But research does support that the more media usage a man consumes, the more he has a stronger adherence to masculine characteristics. So, men can learn masculine traits from other places, like their dads or their brothers or their uncles or their friends. So they're not just learning it from media, but media does play a major role in defining masculine behavior for some. According to the social cognitive theory, society can learn their behaviors from media. And if girls aren't seeing themselves equally portrayed, even if it isn't a role of a mother or someone who's not working, but who are they learning their behaviors from? They might see themselves as being less than because they're not being portrayed equally, or because they are just being portrayed as objects. And then boys, how are they going to feel about themselves? So obviously, that research shows that they take on more masculine traits, but if they aren't seeing women portrayed equally, how do they feel about them? So just to conclude, I think that we can see from research that gender identities are based on characteristics and are not necessarily based on a person's biological sex. We've also looked at the varying concepts surrounding gender, and we've identified ways in which men and women are portrayed differently in media. So I think that Gerbner's cultivation theory proves that society is influenced by media, and this demonstrates that gender schemas can come from media representations.